Nigeria, a vibrant tapestry of places, people, stories, struggles, and unshakable spirits. Politicians make promises, but who really holds them accountable? I'm Donu, and this isn't just about politics. This is about us. This is where we confront the hard truths that few say publicly. Hello everyone, welcome to Nigeria Unfiltered. Okay, so right now there's a buzz in America and a little bit internationally about some journalists in Alaska who wrote about Charlie Kirk, the Republican icon who was shot last month. And what they wrote displeased some of Charlie Kirk's supporters. And so I think some of those supporters are quite influential. In fact, I think one of them was a senator who complained to the editor of the newspaper that these journalists worked for. In fact, I think it was more than one publication. Anyway, there were complaints about what had been written about Charlie Kirk by people who think Charlie Kirk could do no wrong and never said anything that was unreasonable. And so the journalists' articles were quietly edited by the editor. And the journalists say that they didn't write anything that was inaccurate or unfair, and they have resigned in annoyance that their articles should have been tampered with because of influence being brought to bear by Charlie Kirk's supporters. Okay, so since journalism began many years and centuries ago, there have always been journalists who are outspoken and who offend people. And there have always been editors who either stand by their journalists when complaints are received or try to edit or amend the parts of the article that caused offense. Okay? I mean, some editors will even completely cancel the whole article. Some will remove the offending paragraphs or tinker with them. And some might even sack you. So, just like in any other profession, there are, rebellious journalists and rebellious editors, and some are more compliant and more willing to listen to critics and act on criticism. Anyway, look, all I'm saying is that there's no profession where you don't get different types of people, okay? And of course, we as journalists always prefer the type of editor who refuses to listen when political interference takes place around the work that we have done, if we are convinced that we have told the truth, okay? So, I also recently read an article by an excellent Nigerian gentleman called Babafemi Ojudu. He started as a journalist and then later became a senator and wound up being an aide to the vice president of Nigeria at one point. And now he's back to writing. He's not really a journalist. He's more of a commentator now. And he's written this book where he talks about something that happened when he was a young editor. He and the guy, funnily enough, a gentleman called Bayo Onanuga, who is now spokesman for President Tinubu, our current head of state. And he talks about, how they offended the then head of state. Okay, so Babafemi Ojudu and Bayo Onanuga were working for a media tycoon called Abiola. I'm giving all these explanations because sometimes I have foreign viewers and they contact me to say they didn't really know what I was talking about. Anyway, look, I can't explain everything in these short YouTube videos. And if you don't understand what I'm going on about, you can always Google and do a bit of historical research yourself. Okay, so Bayo and Babafemi were working for, I think it was a magazine Anyway, they were working for Abiola, who owned their publications, and they offended um, General Babangida, who was the president at the time, because we had a military government. Anyway, there was a big hoo-ha about them having offended the president, and the president went after the owner of the publication that had published these offensive articles, or article. There was one particular article that really upset the authorities. And long story short, Babafemi and Bayo Onanuga were prevailed upon to change their position and even to apologize for what they had said, or for the fact that they had published this article, and they refused and resigned instead of towing the government's line. Okay, so I've just read Babafemi's autobiographical account of what happened over 30 years ago, and about how he and his friend and colleague resigned because they weren't ready to be obedient and do what the head of state wanted, and indeed what the owner of their publication wanted as well. Because Chief Abiola didn't think it was a battle worth fighting, and he asked them to, climb down. And they refused, they resigned. Meanwhile, today, 3-4 decades later, some American journalists have also walked out for the same reason, really, at the end of the day: political interference. Well, there are brave journalists everywhere. And there are cowardly journalists everywhere, or cautious, if you want to be more polite about it. But my argument is that whether we're talking about 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or today, whether we're talking about America or Britain or Hungary or Nigeria or wherever, journalists should be kick-ass people, in my opinion. Obviously, you have news reporters who just report the news as they see it. But even that objective reportage comes under attack from people who want to tyrannically control the media. So, and then, how much more so journalists who deal with opinions being under attack from time to time, or constantly in some cases. Long story short, I think we need more Nigerian journalists today should be like Babafemi and Bayo were in their heyday. They should stand up to be counted. They should say hell no. And they should rail against governmental corruption, governmental incompetence, governmental injustices, governmental theft. It's their job to hold the authorities to account, to tell truth to power fearlessly. And I just think that hardly any Nigerian journalists are doing that today. I mean, there's a young man called David Hundeyin. He seems very courageous. There's another one, older, called Showore, whom I'm sure many of you have heard of. I can't say that everything they say is true or that I agree with everything they say, but they do seem to have the balls to refuse to be intimidated. And I just think that, journalism is that's what we as journalists are meant to be: custodians of the public good. We're supposed to be champions. We're supposed to protect and fight for citizens to get the best possible deal from the people who rule them. And I just don't think that Nigerian journalists are doing that right now. So let me just say that as you are abusing judges and law enforcement agencies, security people, politicians, and other categories of person who is not doing enough to make this country move forward, I think journalists, the media has to be included, because we're really not doing a great job right now. We're too docile. We're too quiet. We're not fighting a good fight. At least not enough of us are fighting a good fight often enough and aggressively enough. And that's our job. Nigerians deserve a brighter today and an even brighter future. And anyway, let me end by telling you the name of this book. It's called Adventures of a Guerrilla Journalist by Babafemi Ojudu. And it will be, it's already been released, and you have to get into Google and stuff to find out how to buy it. Um, it's well worth a read. It speaks of the kind of courage that journalists can and should display. Thank you.